I just finished reading The Image and Likeness of God, chapters 1 and 2 by Vladimir Lossky, and I thought I'd add a few reflections. So oftentimes I think that people can approach these texts like Vladimir Lossky's and get a little bit overwhelmed by the terminology. Everything seems very complex. But actually, when you get down to the conclusion that Lossky comes to, and that all of these thinkers always circle back around to, it's actually in defense of a very, very simple idea, which is that you can encounter God through his energies directly, that God will meet you wherever you are. You don't need to ascend to some exalted state in order to finally encounter God. To encounter God fully, you would have to be at the summit of uncreated reality. But God meets you in the face of Jesus Christ wherever you happen to be, but in such a way as it never negates or limits him to that meeting of you with him. And so all of the fancy terminology is meant to preserve the absolute transcendence of God, while also making room for him to seek true union with you, his creation, wherever you are, in whatever state you find yourself, to the extent that you can meet him. And you meet him precisely by knowing where you are and approaching him based on who you truly actually are. And that's the importance of repentance, is that you cannot meet God if you're living a lie. And so God calls you to, authenticity is now a ruined word, but a form of authenticity in relation to him, where you come to fully acknowledge who you are and where you are, so that you can encounter as much of God as you possibly can, given who you are and where you are, rather than just pretending you're more full than you are. If the goal is the fullness of the Spirit operating in your life, filling your heart, filling your nous, and transcending your mind, such that you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind, then if that's the goal, then that requires much self-reflection about the actual state of my soul and my heart, my nous, such that God can meet me where I am and give me as much of himself as I can handle. God is always willing to give as much of himself as we can take in. But we have to do the work of repentance so that we approach him in such a way that those parts of us that can be filled with his presence will be. And that's really as simple as it gets, some of the highlighted portions of this text, the theology of darkness, which was but a metaphor of a dogmatic truth, will give way to a theology of uncreated light, a real element in mystical experience. That's not the part that I was looking at. So the idea of infinite progress is predicated on always finding God finding us where we are at, and him drawing us into greater relationship with him, greater experience of union with him. But it's a real union. We don't have to have all of God in order to be united to God. That's the point. He has to have as much of us as we're willing to give him. But we can never have all of him, and that's a good thing. We cannot have complete knowledge of God, and that's a good thing. So this is what Lossky says. The hierarchy of Dionysius does not in any way limit the fullness of the union. At each step of the ladder, union with God is fully realized, but this fullness is not uniform. It is personal. So it's not like everybody gets the same amount of fullness. It's because it's personal. It has to do with the fullness that you can experience. So every person is at a different point, and each person receives what they can. And God does not limit them in any way. Instead, the limitation is on the created being and where they are in relation to God. And so people get bogged down in the details, and they think this is really complex, but it's everything goes back to defending a very simple thing, and it's the same simple truth since the very beginning, that we encounter the fullness of God in the face of Jesus. And if we look to him, then everything else falls into place. There is no development of doctrine, because doctrine is an action. It's a relationship. It's a personal encounter. The entire doctrine of the church is predicated on a personal encounter with God. And so, in a way, the Pentecostals who say we're all about personal relationship with Jesus and not religion, they're correct. However, having had many experiences in the Pentecostal world, most of which were probably illegitimate, the ones that were not illegitimate always surrounding true repentance and sorrow over sin and the brokenness in my life, that oftentimes what you're encountering in Pentecostal worship, that kind of overwhelming emotional high, is a characteristic of drug-induced states. And so it's of ecstatic states. And an ecstatic state overwhelms your agency. And to the extent that it overwhelms your agency, it's actually negating your personhood and your personality. And that's something that God would never do. And so, circling back around, there is nothing in Dionysius or Gregory of Nyssa that is out of alignment with the witness of the Scriptures. When you understand the implications of the Scriptures, that the unknowable, transcendent God has revealed himself in Jesus Christ.